any time away from this amazing panel that we have tonight to talk about investment trends. So I'll just open it up. We've got Ruchita Sinha of Sanofi Ventures, Asra Nadeem of Draper University, Paul Willard of Storm Ventures, and Nancy Wojtas of Cooley to discuss some of the trends on the panel. So let's just get started. I'd love to have Nancy introduce herself briefly, and we'll go down the line to have everybody introduce themselves.
So I'm Nancy Wojtas. I'm a partner at Cooley in the business department. I've been a public company lawyer my entire life. I started out at the Securities and Exchange Commission. And if anybody knows anything about Cooley, I've been here for about 18 years. And we have a platform for emerging companies. And so notwithstanding I'm a public company lawyer, I do emerging company work. And about 2 years ago, one of my emerging companies said, gee, I want to tokenize the business. And it's like, say what? So that kind of started my quest down cryptocurrency land and blockchain.
Hey, I'm Paul Willard. I was an aerodynamics engineer at Boeing before there was an internet. After that, I worked for 4 startups over a period of 15 years. 3 of them IPO'd, so had some amazing experiences. And then started investing 5 years ago. Specifically avoided crypto and blockchain because I had friends that's all they did, and I figured they'd bury me. And then 3 of my companies turned around and used a blockchain to accomplish their business need and sort of drive me down the rabbit hole backwards.
Cool. My name is Asra. I grew up in Pakistan and pretty much grew up on the internet. And been building online infrastructure for governments and MNCs in Pakistan, Middle East, North Africa for about 10 years. Tim Draper, he's a venture capitalist, invested in one of our companies. That's kind of how I heard of him or knew him, and then moved to North America and kind of was trying to figure out where the next challenge is. And Tim was starting this pre-accelerator for early stage companies and started running that for him. And I'm a vice president there now, and I'm also a partner in our early stage fund. So that's what I do.
Hey everyone, I'm Ruchita Sinha. I'm an investor with Sanofi Ventures, which is a life science and healthcare focused fund. I invest in across biotech and different opportunities in digital health. And blockchain is an interesting vertical for us. We've made one investment in the space, exploring other use cases within the healthcare span.
Great, thanks. So I'll get started. And I think I want to open up the question to all of you saying, what do you find most compelling about blockchain? Ruchita?
So I think all the aspects I look at are from a healthcare lens, and I believe you hit on a couple in your introductory presentation. So the 3 things I think that really make blockchain very valuable in the healthcare arena are, number 1, the ability. It's really the interoperability. So the ability to intersect and integrate data sources at the patient level from a variety of data sources, and this includes EHRs, claims, wearables, consumer data, really all of it. And there is a need for a number of use cases for this integration of data at the patient level. So that's number 1. Very few technologies have the ability to do that in a secure manner. Number 2, what really is applicable about blockchain in healthcare is the lack of trust issue. So there are a number of parties and data exchange that needs to happen between providers, payers, consumers, pharma companies, and med device companies on a regular basis when care is delivered to the patient. And for the most part, there is complete lack of trust between these different parties. Nobody wants to open up their data sources to the other party. But as we move towards the world of being paid for outcomes and really being paid when the patient gets better versus being paid as procedures and drugs are being given, this needs to happen because payers have some data, pharma companies have some data, and providers have some data, and all these pieces of data need to be able to come together to understand how the patient is doing. So blockchain is really one of the sources, being an independent ledger where this data can be integrated in a secure manner without providing access, complete access to the other parties. Number three, one of the problems we have in healthcare is too many intermediaries. And if you follow the supply chain and the profit pool in healthcare, the reason why costs are so high and patients are on the hook for such huge copays is because there are way too many intermediaries taking a cut in the process. Blockchain really has the ability to get rid of intermediaries and to create a system, an ecosystem where there are fewer intermediaries versus more. So really, it's those three things that make blockchain a very applicable technology in healthcare.
Super.
Cool. So that pretty much sums up everything that's exciting about blockchain. But what we find exciting aside from that is obviously from a venture capitalist perspective, obviously the returns are great. It's an early technology. If you invest in infrastructure and all of these things, the returns are pretty good. But also from an impact perspective, we have 22 funds globally, and most of our funds, what they invest in is areas where the cost of service is really high and the quality of service is really low, and problems can be really solved through technology or impact can be made through technology. So that's where blockchain comes in for us, and it's very, very interesting, be that government, healthcare, and all these different like supply chain management, even CDN, all of these things. So it's pretty exciting. And then obviously from a venture perspective, that's it.
Yeah. I'll say the same thing in a different way for fun. No, just kidding. Two features which the last panel actually mentioned, so I won't elaborate deeply on either, but I'll elaborate on their application, are the trust that's built into blockchain transactions, allowing adversaries to suddenly both compete and enable each other, which is an interesting thing. To me, that one, enables a lot of advances in anything that has a clearinghouse. So like anywhere I see a clearinghouse, it's like, how big a market is that clearinghouse market? How big a market is that clearinghouse market? You can just pick them off because they're all going down. It's just a matter of time, and venture capitalists tend to pick off big ones first. And then the second one is, which was also mentioned in the first panel, but the supply chain side. And you didn't really dig into this, but I think the beauty of it, I think over and over again in online world, markets have been opened up and taken to tech because data which historically wasn't digitized is suddenly digitized. And by putting something on a blockchain, you are sort of by definition forcing a digitization of a bunch of stuff that likely wasn't before, at least in the case of supply chain. And so that's why I think you see a lot of great supply chain applications where you can take a lot of cost out of the system by forcing it to become digital.
So again, I'm a public company lawyer, and I walked into this with a great deal of skepticism. In fact, I'm known as like the worst cynic at the firm. And when I first started studying blockchain, I started thinking, hey, what's the best use case that I could think of? And it's really the elimination of transfer agents. So if any of you transfer a security, transfer agents provide, in my view, absolutely no value to our ecosystem here. The records are wrong for the most part. They insist on companies paying them huge amounts of money and then requiring the company's lawyers to validate, in effect, the transaction. So when I saw that we could eliminate these stupid people from impacting our lives, I said, I am signed on to this program. So that's what convinced me. Hopefully nobody's a transfer agent in here.
Too late now. Exactly. So I think, all of you have made some really great points. And I think that there are some fundamental values of blockchain that are really pretty exciting. There's trust, whether it comes by disintermediation and establishing peer-to-peer trust, or establishing greater trust around data, improving privacy around data, improving security around data, improving transparency across, say, supply chains or processes, improving, I would say, identity across the chain. So I mean, these are things, and interoperability, because that's, I think, something that is really important, particularly in healthcare, but in other areas as well. So anything around data that you can think of, whether it's having quality data come in and authenticating that data and then manipulating that data, processing that data, and then out comes magical results, and maybe you add things like AI, ML, IoT, all of this to really further amplify the process. I think those are some of the things that I think are really great use cases, fundamental use cases that are really compelling about blockchain. So here's another question. Do you think there's a value proposition for tokens in the enterprise? Who wants to go first?
Does USD count as a token?
We're not
Because I
talking
think we use them a
fiat.
lot.
How about non-fiat based?
I mean, I haven't seen many use cases in enterprise that require it, because USD is a perfectly acceptable token as far as I'm concerned, and it's one that's been used for a long time. I shouldn't say never, but I'm just saying I haven't seen it in front of my face yet.
The only application I've seen is in patient health records and PHRs, which again is the success is yet to be proven. But there is a wave of consumerism coming in healthcare where patients want and need to have ownership of their data, and they decide who gets access to their data and how they get access to it. And tokens and there are companies out there that are using tokens to be able to incentivize patients to share that data that they can then monetize with enterprises for a number of use cases. So that's really the only application. Again, the long-term sustainability and business application of that is yet to be proven, because those companies are really early stage. But in theory, you get I think everyone gets the idea of why wouldn't you want patients to have access and ownership of their data and decide who gets access to the data. Now, how do you make money off of it? That's probably the second wave, and I'm sure smart entrepreneurs will figure that out.
Okay. Asra?
Yeah, same. We haven't seen many use cases of it, but again, it's up for grabs. But like one of the recent ones we saw was in power grids. But again, it's something that's yet to be proven, but never say never. So we'll see where that goes.
I will say this, that I think, and I agree with Ruchita that, many of these use cases in terms of the tokenization models within enterprise are yet unproven. But I think that what's really exciting is when you have disparate players that are forming part of an ecosystem that don't often have that incentive to share. I think the incentivization models and the gamification that we're seeing within that enterprise by way of tokens is really pretty an exciting concept that up till now really hasn't been so prevalent or successful even. So I think that in healthcare, for example, I do agree that there are some really great monetization opportunities for patients to own their data, for people to own their data, and decide by way of selective disclosure who gets access to the data, when they get access to the data, to what extent. So levels of disclosure, I think, are pretty interesting. And so things like pharmaceutical and clinical trials, for example, are great examples where, in clinical trials, you have maybe a 40% attrition rate of people participating in these trials. And so if you can incentivize these people to stay with the program and to its completion through all of the interventions that they have to go through so that the drug process becomes a little bit easier to develop, now we're going to be able to reap the benefits by way of reducing that time and expense in drug development efforts, for example. So we as consumers might have lesser price tags associated with really exciting drugs that are out there that are going to solve real health issues, for example. So that's an issue that I think that, just across enterprise and then across supply chains, I think incentivizing, like I said, unlikely players to be able to play in the same sandbox and being able to share a certain level of data without compromising privacy. I think this is something that's pretty exciting in terms of what we're seeing with the utilization of tokens.
Right. And if I could just add one more like interesting use case that we saw, it isn't like fully implemented yet, but that's in CRM. So it's like a lot of these tokens are being utilized for internal employee incentives or like sales incentives and things like that. So that would be something else to kind of keep an eye on.
Super.
But so far it's just fun and games up there. So.
Well, these are early days, so let's remind ourselves where we're at in this. What do you think in terms of investment opportunities? What are you seeing exciting today and say into 2019? Nancy, you want to kick that off? What are you seeing?
Well, since I'm not investing, I'm advising. What we see a lot of our investors really focused on are, blockchain technologies themselves, the new protocols they're very interested in. There are some VC funds interested in applications, but not quite as many. Stable coins are something that's very hot right now, which I still don't quite get. Same thing with the Merkle tree. You actually understand it. So right now, again, we're at the beginning of the investing spectrum, in my view, and what we see of a lot of our investors who we're advising, they're diversifying. They don't know who the winners are going to be, and so they're investing across the board in these technologies. So at this point, who knows, right?
Okay. Paul, I know you've invested a few, so what do you think is exciting?
Yeah, I did one that I was hoping was going to be in the press yesterday, and it got delayed, and so there's a fourth. But I still love clearinghouses and supply chain, honestly, and so that base clearinghouse for supply chain has to make the business case work. There's got to be a big enough business model there. But then what you see is, all right, somebody replaces the clearinghouse with a blockchain. They're also going to digitize a whole bunch of this ecosystem that wasn't digital before. So they're going to scoop up a bunch of other value around there as well and roll it all together to make it as big as they can and as transformational as they can and as motivating as they can to a network, which is hopefully winner take all, lock everybody else out. But it all has to start with a problem. I mean, at the end of the day, saying you're a blockchain company, unless you're consensus, is like saying you're a Java company to me. I'm like, no, you're not. You use a blockchain to solve a problem that makes money and has value.
But you're doing equity investments, right?
So far.
Yeah.
I've been waiting for somebody to pull out, by the way, a token that is just a share of the stock. An equity token that's a share of the stock, so that a deal looks exactly like an equity deal, but it's tokenized. Anyway.
Again, for us, it's like, I don't know how many of you know this, but Tim wanted to split California into 3. So these days, we're not very happy with the government. So for us, that's like a great use cases, like all the government related use cases. We recently invested with the government of Papua New Guinea to buy an island with our Draper alumni, and we're building a new economic zone with them there. So we're testing a whole bunch of use cases there, also space and blockchain. So for us, a lot of this goes back to different technologies emerging together and blockchain being a use case for them. So space technologies using blockchain, satellites, data mining, that's another one. Also like healthcare supply chain. We initially invested a whole bunch in just infrastructure and stock exchanges, et cetera, but now we're kind of diversifying from that. But just equity investing as well.
So I'll mention 2 use cases. One that I've made an investment in and another that I'm closely looking at. So the first is smart payments and outcomes-based payments between different stakeholders in the healthcare industry. So $3 trillion in payments moving annually through different parties within healthcare. And a larger and larger percentage of that is going towards outcomes-based payment, meaning you get paid only when the patient gets better. Now, that is a very complex problem because if the patient has diabetes, the patient's insulin level fluctuates on a daily basis, on an hourly basis. How do you track that? And how do you measure the patient? How do you get as a pharma company, how do you get paid based on that? And as a payer, how do you pay based on that? So it's a very complex problem that requires monitoring on a real-time, hourly basis how each patient is doing, and take that into account with 80 million patients living with diabetes. It's a really a big complex problem that I think this technology has the power to enable. And so that's one of the companies we've invested in that is enabling these outcomes-based contracts between the payer and the provider, and then the payer and the pharma companies based on what type of payment exchange happens between them. So that's number one, I'm super excited about. Number two is pharma supply chain. Now, anytime you have, in the venture world, anytime you have an unmet need with a big addressable market, it's an attractive industry, attractive opportunity. Anytime you have a regulatory tailwind behind it, it's an even more attractive opportunity, right? So pharma supply chain is exactly in that space right now, where in 2013, there was the Pharma Drug Supply Chain Act that was passed, which puts pretty onerous reporting requirements on pharma companies to trace where their product is going. And that is really to protect the consumer from consuming counterfeit drugs that then harms the consumer. According to that law, which the FDA is in agreement with, from 2013, there is exactly a decade that the pharma industry has before they get enforced to track every unit level drug, right? Now, pharma is very scared because they don't have the capability to do that. They have maybe N+2 or N-2, whatever you say. They have the capability to do that. They don't have the capability to track on a unit level. So it's a huge unmet need. The big pharma companies are setting up their own counterfeit centers where they are experimenting the technologies. There is a company that has been around called TraceLink for 9 years. They just raised $50 million to transfer their entire platform onto blockchain or enable blockchain into that platform, however they're doing it. All this to say that this is a space that has high unmet need, regulatory tailwinds, and we believe that there's some innovation coming in that space.
That's really great. I will just add to this that what I'm particularly excited about with the fund that we're launching is not only enterprise, which we've heard about supply chain, we've heard about fintech, we've heard about healthcare. So just in general, I think enterprise is a really huge space for us to play in. But then foundational protocols, we've heard a little bit about identity, we've heard about interoperability, we've heard about scalability, governance. These are great things for us to be concentrating on. Blockchain is still, I maintain, early days. And so what we want to see is all of the foundational sorts of elements resolved and the maturity of technology to be developed, which I think enterprise is a great partner for all of us as entrepreneurs to get involved in, as venture capitalists to get involved with, because they have the resources to be able to address big problems. And so I think in the next 2 to 3 years, we're going to see a lot of maturing in this landscape. And through this time, if we can get all of these fundamental sorts of issues addressed by really bright minds, then I think it sets us up for that next big wave of applications that are going to really take off and that are going to be much more consumer oriented. Last question, I think we've got maybe 3 minutes left. Do you think the regulatory environment here in the US affects your interest in tokens, or do you think you're going to invest in a mix of equity and tokens? Do you want to comment?
So us personally, the way we're set up as a fund, we're probably going to do just equity investments. However, we have invested in companies that have tokens, and we won't do it, but other investors might do it subsequently with equity. I think just as a point in terms of the security and the government aspect that you said, one of the big reasons why we're investing in blockchain is to actually enable the technologies in ex-US and global markets, right? Because we see very much an application and test beds in ex-US countries that we are working in. And so that's one of the big reasons why we're investing in the space.
So we're definitely heavily investing in developing markets and outside of the US, and then both equity and token investments whenever, more equity, less token, but definitely the regulations do affect you every now and then because we have a big fund in China and like funds here, etc. But the entrepreneurs, it's amazing. They always find a way around it. So, yeah.
We're a US-based enterprise software fund, and so the regulatory is maybe more constraining for us. For those that don't know about it, there's something called the venture capital exclusion rules, and they tie our hands pretty well until the SEC says how they're going to treat token investments relative to the rest of our portfolio, and make it pretty difficult for a US venture fund, as opposed to a private equity fund that's acting like a venture fund, to make token investments. So I try to give you enough information that you can Google it if you want to learn more later.
So the Securities and Exchange Commission, and again, I started out my career there. I loved the SEC. I'm incredibly critical of the SEC because in 2017, until December, they were pretty much silent on tokens. And there were over, 1,500 token issuances in 2017 that suddenly now the SEC has said tokens are securities with the exception of Bitcoin and now Ether, even though if Ether were to do their launch today, they would be in violation of the law the way they had done it. And the SEC continues to really be silent other than through enforcement actions. There are a number of investigations pending right now against companies who floated tokens in 2017, a few in 2018. They are speaking by enforcement and by speech, and that is not a way to regulate a market. And Cooley's part of a small industry group with Andreessen Horowitz, who's a big token investor. Union Square Ventures, again, a huge token investor. NVCA, two academics, Joe Grunfest and Adam Sterling from Berkeley, and then two other law firms, McDermott, Will & Emery and Perkins Coie. And we submitted a safe harbor proposal to try to rationalize the securities laws with token offerings so that entrepreneurs who are interested in doing token offerings have some basis to actually do that. It's been sitting with the SEC since March of this year. We continue to meet with them, with the other regulators. That's one regulator. There are various others, the FTC, Department of Treasury, FTC, all of them have jurisdiction. And we're talking to Congress on a weekly basis. Interesting factoid for you. The Republicans have an open mind, shockingly. The Democrats hate cryptocurrency, and if Congress changes cryptocurrency, there's something penned right now where it's pretty much banned. So there are a lot of headwinds that we're facing right now for companies who want to do token offerings. We haven't done one in 2018, a public token sale. Once the chairman started talking at the end of December, we cautioned all of our entrepreneurs, you need to step back. We're moving more of them towards equity with the possibility of a token offering when the regulations kind of shake out. That's going to be a number of years yet. When we asked the SEC on the safe harbor, when do you think you could come out with something? And they said, well, we're the government. And I said, yes, I know. And they said, it'll be years. So it will be years. And if you have to do a security token, that path is not very clear still yet. And right now, there's no method to trade security tokens. We're, hopefully getting closer. Talked to the crypto queen at the SEC just very recently, and she said, in the next year or so, we will authorize an exchange. And I said, look, I started out in the division of trading and markets. So they move very slow. I said, that's one of the reasons I moved to the chairman's office. I said, you're talking at least 2 years. She didn't comment. So there are a lot of headwinds at this point, and that's why we are moving entrepreneurs to equity investments. The problem with it is everybody's heard about, hey, they raised $250 million, and, you know, and you're not going to get that in a Series A investment. So believe me. So, you know, you need to really think about how your path is if you are thinking about doing a token sale. So,
In the US.
in the US.
Thankfully,
Even not in the US, because the SEC has long-arm jurisdiction. All you need is one US investor, and they're going to latch onto that.
Yeah.
And the regulators are only one issue. Who I fear more are the plaintiffs' bar.
Yeah.
As you may have read, Ripple got sued for it's a multi-billion-dollar class action based on the fact that they're alleging it was a security and it was sold illegally. This is a token investor who bought in January $2,000 worth of the token and sold 2 weeks later and had a $200 loss. And now he's the lead plaintiff in a multi-billion-dollar class action. That's a problem. It will shut down every company. I mean, Ripple has the resources to fight that right now. But if they lose or they settle, that's just going to open up the door for these plaintiffs' counsels to start suing everybody.
Thankfully, we have enterprise. So I think the hope in all of this winter, so to speak, of crypto is that we have spring in enterprise. So I think that's kind of the lasting. Unfortunately, we really out of time. So thanks very much for participating. Sorry that we don't have any questions. I know that these are burning questions, but I want to be respectful of the time limits we have tonight. Thanks. And thank you, panelists.